The flickering glow of flames licks the stone walls of St. Agnes Convent, a crumbling relic nestled in the misty hills of upstate New York. As the night of October 17, 1993 erupts into chaos, Sister Margaret, a young nun with wide, frantic eyes, stands motionless at the edge of the inferno. Her habit singed, her lips moving in a silent chant no one can decipher. The air is thick with smoke and the anguished cries of her fellow sisters. Yet she seems untouched by the panic, as if tethered to something unseen, something that whispers to her alone. Firefighters later recall her eerie calm, describing how she clutched a rosary so tightly it drew blood from her palms, her gaze fixed on a point beyond the blaze, as if something was watching her back. What could drive a woman sworn to a life of peace and prayer to stand at the heart of such a catastrophe? What secrets did Sister Margaret carry that night? Secrets so heavy they seemed to ignite the very walls around her. This is the disturbing case of the nun who heard voices, a story that begins with devotion but descends into a labyrinth of doubt, fear, and a truth so unsettling it will make you question the boundaries of the human mind. Was she a victim of her own fractured psyche? A pawn in a sinister game, or something far stranger? Something that defies explanation? Stay with us until the end, because what you're about to uncover will leave you haunted, wondering if the voices she heard were ever truly silent. This case isn't just a mystery. It's a mirror held up to the fragility of belief, the thin line between faith and madness, and the terrifying possibility that some truths are better left buried. Sister Margaret's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. What happens when the voice you trust most, whether it's your own mind, your faith, or something else entirely, leads you to the edge of destruction? How far would you follow it before you realized you were lost? We invite you to dive into this dark journey with us. If you're ready to unravel the enigma of the burning convent, hit that like button to help others discover the chilling truth behind this case. In the comments, let us know you're with us by writing, "I'm ready to uncover the secrets of St. Agnes." By doing so, you're not just watching, you're joining a community of truth seekers, those brave enough to peer into the shadows of the human psyche and face what lies there. Thank you for being here, for daring to ask the questions no one else will. Brace yourself, because what comes next will unravel a revelation so profound, it will forever change how you view the delicate threads that hold the mind together. In the autumn of 1992, the heavy oak doors of St. Agnes Convent creaked open to welcome Margaret Elaine Carter, a 24-year-old woman whose soft features and quiet demeanor belied the storm brewing within her. The convent, perched on a lonely hill in upstate New York, was a place of austerity, its gray stone walls weathered by decades of wind and secrets. For Margaret, it was a sanctuary, a place to escape a past she rarely spoke of, a childhood marked by loss and whispers of instability that clung to her like damp fog. She arrived with a small suitcase, a worn Bible, and a fervent desire to dedicate her life to God. The other nuns, older and steeped in routine, saw her as a breath of fresh air, her earnest prayers and tireless work in the garden, bringing a rare warmth to the cloistered halls. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of unease that Mother Superior Clara noticed from the start. Margaret threw herself into the convent's rhythm. Morning prayers at dawn, silent meals, and evenings spent copying scripture by candlelight. Yet as the weeks passed, subtle cracks began to show. She was often found staring into the distance during Vespers, her lips moving as if responding to someone unseen. When questioned, she'd smile faintly and say she was praying deeply, but her hands trembled and her gaze darted to the shadows. The other nuns chalked it up to the intensity of her devotion. But Sister Teresa, a kind-hearted woman in her 60s, confided to Clara that Margaret seemed to be listening to something or someone beyond the hymns. One chilly November evening, as the wind howled through the convent's ancient chimneys, Margaret was assigned to clean the chapel's altar. The task was simple, but when Sister Teresa passed by hours later, she found Margaret kneeling before the crucifix, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. The altar cloth was crumpled at her feet and the candles had burned low, wax pooling like tears on the stone floor. "She's speaking to me," Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Teresa, startled, asked who she meant. Margaret's reply was cryptic, "The one who knows my heart." Teresa assumed she meant God, but the way Margaret's fingers clutched her rosary, as if anchoring herself to reality, left Teresa uneasy. By early 1993, Margaret's behavior grew stranger. She began waking in the middle of the night, pacing the dormitory's cold stone floors, muttering phrases no one could fully catch, something about a task and a cleansing fire. The nuns, bound by their vows of charity, tried to guide her with prayer, but Margaret's responses grew vague, her eyes often fixed on the chapel's stained glass windows, where the Virgin Mary's serene face seemed to watch her back. Mother Superior Clara, a pragmatic woman who'd seen her share of troubled souls, began to wonder if Margaret's fervor was less divine and more a sign of something unraveling within her mind. Clara decided to keep a closer eye on the young nun, assigning her lighter duties to ease what she thought might be stress. But Margaret's intensity only deepened. She started skipping meals, claiming she needed to purify herself, and spent hours in the convent's library, poring over obscure texts about martyrdom and divine visions. One book, a dusty tome on medieval mystics, was found open on her desk, its pages marked with frantic underlines about voices that commanded sacrifice. Clara, alarmed, considered contacting a priest for guidance, but Margaret's outward calm reassured her, perhaps too much. The convent, after all, was a place of faith, and who were they to question what might be a divine calling? Yet as winter tightened its grip on St. Agnes, strange incidents began to pile up. A candle left burning in the chapel after midnight. A window in the dormitory found shattered with no explanation. And then there was the night Sister Teresa swore she heard Margaret's voice outside her cell, whispering, "It's coming soon." When she opened the door, the hallway was empty, but the air felt heavy, as if someone had just passed through. The nuns began to whisper among themselves, their trust in Margaret wavering. Was she truly hearing God, or was something darker speaking through her? The answer lay hidden in the months ahead, waiting to erupt in a way no one could predict. By the spring of 1993, the air at St. Agnes Convent seemed to carry a weight that hadn't been there before, as if the stones themselves absorbed the growing unease surrounding Sister Margaret. The nuns, once warmed by her quiet zeal, now moved cautiously around her, their glances lingering when she passed. Her habits grew stranger, her presence more unsettling. She no longer joined the others in the garden, where she'd once tended roses with care, but instead spent hours alone in the chapel, kneeling before the altar, her lips moving in a ceaseless murmur. The other sisters, bound by their vows, tried to dismiss their discomfort, but the convent's once peaceful silence now felt oppressive, like the calm before a storm. Mother Superior Clara, torn between compassion and concern, decided to confront Margaret gently. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the chapel's stained glass windows, casting fractured colors across the pews, Clara found Margaret there, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "Sister Margaret," Clara said softly, "you seem troubled. Can you share what weighs on you?" Margaret's eyes, wide and unblinking, met Clara's for a moment before drifting to the crucifix above the altar. "He speaks to me," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of reverence and fear. "He says the convent must be purified, that we've strayed from his path." Clara's heart sank. She'd heard of nuns claiming divine visions, but Margaret's words carried a fervor that felt less like faith and more like a fever. Clara pressed further, asking who he was, but Margaret only shook her head, her fingers tracing the beads of her rosary as if they were a lifeline. "You wouldn't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He chose me because I'm willing to listen." Clara, unsure whether to involve a priest or a doctor, opted for caution. She assigned Sister Teresa to shadow Margaret, hoping a familiar presence might steady her. But Teresa's reports only deepened the mystery. She described Margaret waking in the night, standing at her window, staring into the darkness as if waiting for someone. Once Teresa caught fragments of Margaret's whispers, "The fire will show them. It will cleanse us all." The words sent a chill through Teresa, who began to fear that Margaret's devotion was twisting into something dangerous. The convent's daily life began to fray. Nuns reported strange occurrences, footsteps echoing in empty corridors, the faint smell of smoke where no fire burned, and pages torn from the library's ancient texts left scattered on the floor. One morning, Sister Agnes, a timid woman in her 40s, found a small bundle of herbs tied with twine outside her cell door, a symbol she recognized from old folklore as a ward against evil. She didn't dare accuse Margaret openly, but the suspicion hung heavy. The nuns' trust in one another, once unshakable, began to erode, replaced by a quiet dread that Margaret's presence was inviting something sinister into their sacred space. Clara, desperate to restore order, consulted Father Daniel, the convent's aging chaplain. He suggested Margaret might be experiencing a spiritual crisis, perhaps exacerbated by her isolation. He recommended more communal activities to ground her, but Margaret resisted, growing agitated when pressed to join the others. During one Sunday Mass, as Father Daniel spoke of obedience, Margaret stood abruptly, her voice cutting through the silence. Obedience to whom? To men who've forgotten his true voice? The congregation froze, the air thick with shock. Clara ushered her out, but not before Margaret's eyes locked onto hers, burning with a conviction that felt almost otherworldly. In private, Clara and Father Daniel debated their next steps. A psychiatric evaluation seemed necessary, but the convent's remote location and limited resources made it difficult. Besides, Margaret's behavior, while strange, hadn't yet crossed into outright danger, or so they thought. Clara wrote to the diocese requesting guidance, but responses were slow, and the convent's isolation left them to handle the situation alone. Meanwhile, Margaret's nighttime wanderings grew bolder. Sister Teresa once followed her to the edge of the convent's grounds, where Margaret stood beneath a gnarled oak, staring into the starry sky, her lips moving as if in conversation. When Teresa called out, Margaret turned, her face pale and serene, and said, "It's almost time. He's shown me the way." As spring turned to summer, the convent's atmosphere grew heavier, the nuns' whispers turning to hushed prayers for protection. Clara, torn between her duty to Margaret and her responsibility to the others, began to fear that the voices guiding Margaret weren't divine at all, but something far more dangerous, something that thrived in the shadows of her mind. The truth, still hidden, was drawing closer, its presence felt in every creak of the convent's ancient walls. By the summer of 1993, St. Agnes Convent felt like a place holding its breath, the once steady rhythm of prayer and routine disrupted by an undercurrent of fear. Sister Margaret's presence, once a source of quiet inspiration, had become a shadow that darkened every corner of the cloister. The nuns, trained to see the divine in all things, struggled to reconcile their faith with the growing unease that followed Margaret like a specter. Her nocturnal wanderings, her cryptic murmurs about purification, and the strange occurrences, burnt candle stubs found in odd places, faint scorch marks on the chapel floor, had woven a tapestry of dread that no amount of prayer could unravel. Mother Superior Clara, her resolve tested, clung to the hope that Margaret's turmoil was a spiritual trial, but doubt gnawed at her, whispering that something far darker was at play. Margaret's behavior grew more erratic as the humid days of July pressed on. She began refusing to attend communal prayers, claiming the other nuns' voices drowned out his words. Instead, she spent hours in the convent's attic, a dusty, seldom visited space filled with relics of past sisters, faded photographs, brittle letters, and crates of forgotten devotional items. Sister Teresa, tasked with watching her, followed her there one afternoon, peering through the cracked door. Margaret sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by a circle of old prayer books, her fingers tracing their pages as she whispered fervently. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something sharper like burnt sage. Teresa caught fragments of Margaret's words. "The fire will rise. It's the only way to save them." When Teresa stepped forward, the floorboards creaking under her weight, Margaret's head snapped up, her eyes glinting with a strange intensity. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice low and steady. "He doesn't want you to see." Teresa reported the incident to Clara, who decided it was time to search Margaret's cell for clues to her state of mind. Under the guise of routine cleaning, Clara and Sister Agnes entered the small, sparse room while Margaret was in the chapel. What they found chilled them. Tucked beneath Margaret's thin mattress was a notebook, its pages filled with frantic looping handwriting. The entries spoke of a messenger who visited her in dreams, urging her to cleanse the house of God. Some passages were illegible, scrawled in a mix of English and what looked like Latin, but one phrase repeated over and over: "Ignis purgat omnia," fire purifies all. Clara, her hands trembling, recognized the phrase from her studies of medieval theology, where it was linked to apocalyptic visions of divine judgment. Beside the notebook was a small vial of oil, its cap loosened, its contents smelling faintly of kerosene. Clara's discovery deepened her fear that Margaret's devotion had crossed into obsession, perhaps even delusion. She confided in Father Daniel, who suggested that Margaret might be suffering from a form of religious mania, a condition he'd read about in old ecclesiastical texts. He urged Clara to contact a psychiatrist, but the diocese's response to her earlier letters had been vague, promising only to review the matter. With no immediate help forthcoming, Clara decided to limit Margaret's movements, confining her to supervised tasks and barring her from the attic. But enforcing this was harder than expected. Margaret seemed to slip through the convent's routines like a ghost, appearing in places she shouldn't, by the well at midnight, in the library after it was locked, or standing silently in the cloister garden, staring at the horizon as if waiting for a sign. The other nuns, once hesitant to speak ill of a sister, began to share their fears in hushed tones. Sister Agnes admitted to waking one night to find Margaret standing at the foot of her bed, her silhouette framed by moonlight, whispering something about the chosen one. Sister Beatrice, the convent's cook, found a charred wooden cross in the kitchen, hidden behind a sack of flour, its edges blackened as if held over a flame. The incidents, small but cumulative, wove a web of suspicion that tightened around Margaret. Yet she remained outwardly serene, her pale face a mask of calm that only deepened the nun's unease. When confronted, she would smile softly and say, "I'm only doing what he asks," her words carrying a conviction that made Clara question whether Margaret was mad, or dangerously certain. As summer waned, Clara faced a growing dilemma: expel Margaret and risk abandoning a soul in need, or keep her close and endanger the convent. She began to pray for guidance, but her prayers felt hollow, drowned out by the memory of Margaret's notebook and that haunting phrase, ignis purgat omnia. The convent, once a haven, now felt like a tinderbox, and Clara couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret's voices were leading them all toward an inevitable spark. The truth, still elusive, waited in the shadows, its shape growing clearer with each passing day. As August 1993 draped St. Agnes Convent in a heavy, humid haze, the atmosphere within its walls grew taut, like a thread stretched to its breaking point. Sister Margaret's presence had become a quiet storm, her every movement watched by nuns who no longer knew whether to pity or fear her. Mother Superior Clara's efforts to contain the situation, restricting Margaret's movements, doubling prayers for unity, seemed to falter against the young nun's unshakable calm. Margaret's eyes, once bright with devotion, now held a distant, glassy sheen, as if she saw beyond the convent's stone walls to a reality no one else could perceive. The other sisters whispered of an unseen presence, a weight that seemed to follow Margaret, thickening the air wherever she went. The convent's daily rituals, once a source of comfort, now felt like a fragile shield against the unknown. During morning prayers, the nuns noticed Margaret no longer sang the hymns, her lips instead forming silent words, her gaze fixed on the chapel's ceiling as if tracing invisible patterns. Sister Teresa, still tasked with watching her, reported a chilling incident one sweltering night. She'd followed Margaret to the cloister garden, where the young nun stood barefoot on the dew-soaked grass, her arms outstretched like a supplicant. The moonlight cast long shadows, and Teresa swore she saw something, a faint distortion like heat rising from pavement, hovering near Margaret. When Teresa called out, the air seemed to snap and Margaret turned, her face serene but her voice sharp. "Don't interrupt him, he's speaking now." Teresa fled, her heart pounding, unable to shake the feeling that something had been watching her. Clara, grappling with the mounting incidents, decided to dig deeper into Margaret's past. She wrote to the parish in Margaret's hometown, a small village in Ohio, hoping to uncover clues about what might have shaped her unraveling. The response, delayed by weeks, arrived in late August, a thin letter from a retired priest named Father Michael. He revealed that Margaret, born to a devout but troubled family, had lost her mother to suicide at age 12. Afterward, she'd been sent to live with an aunt who spoke of Margaret's episodes, moments when she'd claimed to hear voices, often after long periods of solitude. The aunt, a strict woman, had dismissed them as childish fantasies, but Father Michael wondered if they'd been a cry for help. He noted that Margaret had joined the convent shortly after a brief hospitalization at 18, though the records were vague, mentioning only emotional distress. Armed with this knowledge, Clara's fear deepened. She began to see Margaret's behavior not as a spiritual crisis, but as a resurgence of something buried, something that the convent's isolation had allowed to fester. She consulted Father Daniel again, who suggested an exorcism as a precaution, though he admitted it was a last resort. Clara hesitated, torn between her rational instincts and the growing sense that Margaret's voices might not be born of her mind alone. Instead, she arranged for a psychiatrist, Dr. Evelyn Harper, to visit from Albany, hoping a professional could offer clarity. But the visit was weeks away, and Clara felt time slipping through her fingers. Meanwhile, the strange occurrences escalated. One morning, Sister Beatrice found the chapel's altar cloth singed at the edges, as if someone had held a flame too close. The same day, Sister Agnes discovered a small pile of ashes in the library, near the shelf where Margaret often read. The ashes, fine and gray, smelled faintly of burnt paper, and Agnes swore she saw faint traces of Latin script in the dust. The nuns' fear began to outweigh their compassion, and some refused to be alone with Margaret, their prayers now laced with pleas for protection. Even Father Daniel, usually composed, admitted to Clara that he felt uneasy during confessions, as if Margaret's presence lingered in the air, watching. Margaret, oblivious to or unconcerned by the growing suspicion, continued her solitary rituals. She was often seen in the convent's crypt, a damp, shadowy chamber beneath the chapel where the remains of past sisters rested. There she'd light candles and kneel for hours, her whispers echoing off the stone walls. Sister Teresa, brave enough to follow her once, overheard fragments. "The fire will show them. It will burn away the lies." When Teresa reported this to Clara, the Mother Superior's resolve hardened. She banned Margaret from the crypt, but enforcing the rule proved futile. Margaret seemed to move unseen, her presence marked only by the faint scent of smoke or the flicker of a candle left burning. As September loomed, Clara felt the convent teetering on the edge of something irreversible. The nuns' unity was fracturing, their faith tested by the mystery of Margaret's voices. Was she tormented by her own mind, or was something else, something ancient and cunning, guiding her toward a purpose no one could yet fathom? The answer, still veiled, seemed to pulse in the convent's shadows, waiting for the moment to ignite. By September 1993, St. Agnes Convent had become a place of whispers and wary glances, its once hallowed halls now steeped in a quiet terror that seemed to emanate from Sister Margaret. The nuns, bound by their vows, clung to routine, but their prayers felt hollow, overshadowed by the growing sense that something malevolent was stirring within their walls. Margaret's behavior had shifted from eccentric to alarming, her serene detachment now punctuated by moments of startling intensity. Her eyes, once soft with devotion, burned with a fervor that made even the most steadfast sisters flinch. Mother Superior Clara, her patience worn thin, felt the weight of her responsibility pressing harder each day, as if the convent itself was urging her to act before it was too late. Margaret's nocturnal wanderings had grown bolder, her presence marked by traces of her strange rituals. One morning, Sister Beatrice found a circle of melted wax on the chapel floor, arranged in a pattern that looked deliberate, almost ceremonial. Nearby, a single page torn from a missal lay crumpled, its edges singed with the words Peccata Mundi, sins of the world, underlined in red ink. The discovery sent a ripple of fear through the nuns, who now avoided the chapel after dark, their faith tested by the suspicion that Margaret's messenger was no divine envoy. Clara, desperate for answers, locked the chapel at night, but the key went missing the next day, found later in Margaret's cell, tucked inside her Bible at a passage about the cleansing fire of judgment. Clara's attempts to reach Margaret grew futile. During a rare moment when she caught her alone in the cloister garden, Margaret stood motionless, staring at a withered rose bush as if it held some secret. "Sister Margaret," Clara said, her voice firm but kind, "you must tell me what troubles you. We can't help if you hide the truth." Margaret turned slowly, her face pale but resolute. "The truth?" she said, her voice low and steady. "The truth is that this place is rotting from within. He's shown me the corruption, the hypocrisy. Only fire can make it clean." Her words, delivered with chilling certainty, left Clara speechless. For the first time, she saw not a troubled soul but a woman convinced of a mission, one that threatened them all. The other nuns, now openly fearful, began to distance themselves. Sister Agnes, once gentle, refused to sleep in the dormitory, claiming she heard whispers through the walls at night, always in Margaret's voice. Sister Teresa, still loyal to her duty, confided to Clara that she'd seen Margaret in the crypt again, surrounded by candles arranged in a spiral, chanting words that sounded like Latin but twisted as if mocking the sacred. When Teresa tried to approach, Margaret's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto Teresa's with such intensity that the older nun fled, convinced she'd glimpsed something unnatural in Margaret's gaze. "It wasn't her," Teresa whispered later, her hands trembling. It was like something else was looking through her. Clara, pushed to her limit, decided to act. She contacted Dr. Evelyn Harper, the psychiatrist from Albany, urging her to come sooner. In the meantime, she and Father Daniel agreed to isolate Margaret, moving her to a small guest room away from the main dormitory. The decision was met with quiet relief from the nuns, but implementing it proved difficult. When Clara informed Margaret, the young nun's calm shattered. "You can't stop him," she shouted, her voice echoing through the cloister the first time anyone had seen her lose control. "He's already here, in every stone, in every heart. The fire is coming, whether you believe or not." Her outburst left Clara shaken, her resolve faltering as she wondered if Margaret's words were delusion or prophecy. The next night, a scream pierced the convent's silence. Sister Beatrice, fetching water from the kitchen, had found Margaret standing in the hallway, a lit candle in her hand, its flame dangerously close to a curtain. When Beatrice called out, Margaret dropped the candle and fled, the flame snuffed out by the stone floor. The incident, though minor, cemented the nun's fears. Margaret was no longer just a troubled sister, but a danger. Clara, sleepless and haunted by Margaret's notebook and its ominous phrase, "Ignis purgat omnia," began to prepare for Dr. Harper's arrival, hoping a professional could untangle the knot of faith madness and something darker that seemed to grip Margaret. But the convent's isolation, once a shield, now felt like a trap. The nuns' prayers grew fervent, their rosaries clutched tightly as they begged for protection from an unseen force they could no longer ignore. Margaret, confined to her new room, sat in silence, her eyes fixed on the window as if waiting for a signal only she could see. The air grew heavier, the shadows deeper, and Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the convent was hurtling toward a moment of reckoning, one that Margaret's voices had already foreseen. As October 1993 dawned, St. Agnes Convent felt like a fortress under siege, its stone walls no longer a barrier against the dread that had taken root within. Sister Margaret, now confined to a small guest room on the convent's eastern wing, seemed to carry the weight of the unseen with her, her presence a constant reminder of the fracture in the community's peace. Mother Superior Clara, her face etched with sleepless nights, counted the days until Dr. Evelyn Harper's arrival, clinging to the hope that an outsider's perspective might unravel the mystery of Margaret's voices. The nuns, their faith strained, moved through their duties with mechanical precision, their prayers laced with a quiet desperation to reclaim the sanctity of their home. But the air itself seemed charged, as if the convent held its breath, waiting for the spark that would ignite the growing tension. Dr. Harper arrived on a gray, drizzling morning, her sensible coat and clipped demeanor a stark contrast to the convent's austere solemnity. A psychiatrist in her late 40s, she carried an air of calm authority, her notepad and steady gaze signaling a mind trained to dissect the chaos of the human psyche. Clara, grateful yet wary, escorted her to the guest room where Margaret sat by the window, her hands folded over her rosary, her eyes fixed on the rain-streaked glass. The room was bare save for a narrow bed, a wooden chair, and a small table where a single candle flickered, its flame casting unsteady shadows. Dr. Harper, noting the candle, exchanged a glance with Clara before sitting across from Margaret. "Sister Margaret," she began, her voice gentle but firm, "I'm here to understand what you're experiencing. Can you tell me about the voices?" Margaret's response was slow, her words measured. "They're not just voices," she said, her gaze still on the window. "He speaks to me clearly, more clearly than anyone ever has. He says the convent is impure, that it must be cleansed." Dr. Harper scribbled in her notepad, her expression neutral, but Clara, standing by the door, felt a chill at Margaret's calm certainty. Over the next hour, Harper probed gently, asking about the nature of the messenger when the voices began and what they demanded. Margaret's answers were cryptic yet consistent. The messenger was divine, his purpose was purification, and fire was the only path to redemption. When pressed about her past, Margaret grew silent, her fingers tightening around her rosary until her knuckles whitened. Dr. Harper's initial assessment, shared privately with Clara, was cautious. She suggested Margaret might be experiencing a form of schizophrenia, possibly triggered by the stress of convent life and her unresolved childhood trauma. The voices, Harper explained, could be hallucinations, a manifestation of a mind struggling to reconcile deep-seated pain with her intense faith. But she admitted something troubled her. Margaret's conviction lacked the disorganization typical of psychotic episodes. Her narrative was coherent, almost rehearsed, as if she were reciting a script she fully believed. Harper recommended a full evaluation at a hospital, but transporting Margaret would require the diocese's approval, a process that could take days. In the meantime, she suggested close supervision and medication to stabilize her, though Clara hesitated, wary of treating a spiritual matter with pills. The nuns, informed only that a doctor was assessing Margaret, grew restless. Sister Teresa, who'd seen Margaret's strangest moments, whispered to Sister Agnes that Harper's presence felt like an intrusion, as if science were trespassing on sacred ground. Yet even Teresa couldn't deny the relief of having someone else bear the burden of Margaret's mystery. That night, however, the convent's fragile calm shattered. Sister Beatrice, fetching linens from the storeroom, found a small bundle of papers hidden behind a crate, pages torn from Margaret's notebook, their edges charred, filled with sketches of flames and cryptic phrases in Latin. The discovery spread quickly, fueling the nuns' fear that Margaret's fixation on fire was no mere delusion, but a plan taking shape. Dr. Harper, staying overnight to observe Margaret, noticed subtle changes in the convent's atmosphere. The nuns avoided her, their eyes darting away as if she might uncover their own secrets. During a second session with Margaret, Harper tried a new approach, asking about the convent itself. Margaret's response was chilling. "This place is a lie. They pray, but they don't listen. He chose me because I hear him." When Harper asked if he ever spoke of harming others, Margaret smiled faintly, her eyes glinting. "Harm? No, salvation." The word hung in the air, its weight pressing on Harper's clinical detachment. She began to wonder if Margaret's voices were not just a product of her mind, but a reflection of something deeper, something tied to the convent's history or its isolation. As Harper prepared to leave the next morning, she urged Clara to act quickly, warning that Margaret's fixation on fire posed a real risk. Clara, torn between faith and fear, nodded, but her thoughts were interrupted by a scream from the chapel. Sister Agnes stood trembling, pointing to the altar where a small flame flickered, licking at the edge of the cloth. It was quickly extinguished, but the message was clear. Margaret, still confined, had somehow left her mark. The nuns' fear turned to panic, and Clara realized that time was running out. The voices, whether real or imagined, were pushing Margaret toward a precipice, and the convent with her. The incident in the chapel on that damp October morning in 1993 marked a turning point for St. Agnes Convent, as if the small flame that licked the altar cloth had ignited a deeper, more pervasive fear among the nuns. The once sacred space where prayers had long woven a tapestry of solace now felt violated, its sanctity tainted by the specter of Sister Margaret's obsession. Mother Superior Clara, her face pale and drawn, stood before the charred altar, her hands clasped tightly as she tried to quell the rising panic among the sisters. The flame had been small, quickly extinguished by Sister Agnes's quick thinking, but its implications burned far brighter. Margaret, confined to her room, had somehow orchestrated this, or something else was at work, something that seemed to seep into the very stones of the convent. Clara, pushed to the edge of her endurance, tightened Margaret's restrictions. She ordered 2 nuns to stand watch outside her door at all times, a task Sister Teresa and Sister Beatrice reluctantly accepted. The guest room, once a place for weary travelers, now felt like a cell, its single window barred with a heavy curtain to block Margaret's view of the outside world. Yet even under such scrutiny, Margaret remained eerily calm, sitting on her bed with her rosary, her lips moving in silent prayer or conversation. When Teresa peeked through the door's small window, she saw Margaret's eyes fixed on the candle on her table, its flame steady despite the drafty room. "He's still here," Margaret murmured once, as if sensing Teresa's gaze. her voice carrying a quiet certainty that made the older nun's skin prickle. Dr. Evelyn Harper, delayed by a storm that turned the roads to mud, sent a letter urging Clara to secure Margaret's transfer to a psychiatric facility immediately. She warned that Margaret's fixation on fire suggested not just delusion but intent, a dangerous combination that could escalate without warning. Clara, still awaiting the diocese's approval, felt trapped by bureaucracy and her own doubts. Was Margaret a danger? Or was she a soul crying out for help, misunderstood by a world too quick to label her mad? Clara's prayers for guidance grew fervent, but the answers remained elusive, drowned out by the memory of the charred altar cloth and the haunting phrase from Margaret's notebook, Ignis purgat omnia. The nuns, now openly fearful, began to unravel. Sister Agnes, usually soft-spoken, snapped at Sister Beatrice during supper, accusing her of hiding the truth about the chapel fire. Beatrice, shaken, admitted she'd seen Margaret near the chapel the night before, despite her confinement, though she couldn't explain how. The accusation sparked whispers among the sisters, some wondering if Margaret had an accomplice or if something supernatural was aiding her. Father Daniel, called to calm the growing discord, spoke of spiritual warfare, suggesting that Margaret's voices might be demonic, a theory that only deepened the nuns' dread. He performed a blessing over the convent, sprinkling holy water in every room, but the gesture felt hollow, the air still heavy with unease. One night, as the wind howled through the convent's chimneys, Sister Teresa woke to a faint scratching sound outside her cell. Heart-pounding, she opened the door to find the hallway empty, but a small pile of ashes lay at her threshold, arranged in a crude spiral. She called for Clara, who arrived with a lantern, her face grim as she recognized the pattern from the chapel floor. The nuns searched Margaret's room, finding her asleep, or so it seemed, her candle extinguished but warm to the touch. The discovery fueled speculation. How could Margaret, under constant watch, leave such signs? Some whispered of sleepwalking, others of something darker, a force that moved through her, unseen but ever present. Clara, desperate for answers, searched the convent's archives, hoping to uncover anything that might explain Margaret's fixation on fire. In a dusty ledger from the 1800s, she found a chilling reference to a fire that had nearly destroyed St. Agnes, sparked by a nun who claimed to hear divine commands. The nun, Sister Abigail, had been confined to an asylum, her fate unrecorded. The parallels to Margaret were uncanny, and Clara began to wonder if the convent itself held a curse, a lingering echo that had found a new vessel in Margaret's troubled mind. She shared her findings with Father Daniel, who grew pale, admitting he'd heard rumors of St. Agnes's haunted past, but dismissed them as folklore. Now he wasn't so sure. As the days grew shorter, the convent's isolation felt suffocating, its walls closing in on the nuns' fraying nerves. Margaret, though confined, seemed to grow stronger, her calm unshaken even as the sisters' fear mounted. During one of Father Daniel's visits, she looked at him and said, "The fire isn't mine. It's his, and it's coming soon." Her words, delivered with a serene smile, sent a shiver through the room. Clara, standing nearby, felt the weight of an impending catastrophe, the spark of Margaret's obsession threatening to engulf them all. The truth, now closer than ever, seemed to pulse in the convent's shadows, waiting for the moment to flare into light. By mid-October 1993, St. Agnes Convent teetered on the edge of collapse, its once unshakable foundation eroded by fear and suspicion. The nuns, their faces drawn from sleepless nights, moved through their duties like ghosts, their prayers drowned out by the echo of Sister Margaret's words and the ever-present threat of fire. Mother Superior Clara, her resolve battered by the relentless string of unsettling events, clung to the hope that Dr. Evelyn Harper's promised return would bring clarity. But the diocese's silence and the convent's isolation left her feeling abandoned, as if the walls themselves conspired to keep Margaret's mystery locked within. The air grew thick with an unspoken certainty. Something was coming, and it was no longer a question of if, but when. Margaret, still confined to her sparse guest room, seemed to exist in a world apart, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos she inspired. The nuns watching her, Sister Teresa and Sister Beatrice, now joined by Sister Agnes in shifts, reported that she spent hours sitting by her window, her rosary dangling loosely in her hands, her lips moving in a constant inaudible chant. The candle on her table, though forbidden, reappeared each night, its flame flickering as if fueled by an unseen force. When questioned, Margaret would only smile, her eyes distant, and say, "He's preparing me. The time is near." Her words, soft but unyielding, sent shivers through her watchers, who began to feel they were guarding not just a troubled nun, but something far more dangerous. On the night of October 16th, the convent's fragile peace shattered. Sister Teresa, stationed outside Margaret's door, dozed briefly in the early hours, only to wake to the faint smell of smoke. Heart pounding, she peered into the room, expecting to find Margaret asleep. Instead, the young nun was gone, the window ajar, the candle burning low but unattended. Panic surged through Teresa as she roused Clara, who rallied the nuns to search the convent. They moved in pairs, lanterns casting trembling shadows across the stone corridors, their whispers mingling with the wind howling outside. The search led them to the crypt, where a faint glow emanated from the stairwell, accompanied by a low, rhythmic chanting that sent a chill through the group. Descending into the crypt, Clara and the others found Margaret kneeling in the center of the chamber, surrounded by a circle of candles arranged in a spiral, their flames casting eerie patterns on the stone walls. Ashes were scattered across the floor, forming shapes that seemed deliberate, crosses, spirals, and what looked like words in a script no one could read. Margaret's voice, steady and melodic, filled the space, her words a mix of Latin and something older, unfamiliar. "Ignis purgat omnia," she intoned, her eyes closed, her face serene as if in ecstasy. When Clara called her name, Margaret's eyes snapped open, and for a moment, they seemed to glow in the candlelight, her gaze piercing through Clara with an intensity that felt almost inhuman. The nuns, frozen in fear, watched as Margaret stood, her movements slow and deliberate. "You can't stop it," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "He's shown me the truth. This place is a lie, built on sin. The fire will make it right." Clara, her voice trembling, ordered Margaret to return to her room, but the young nun only smiled, stepping over the candles as if they were sacred. Sister Agnes, overcome, fled the crypt, her sobs echoing up the stairs. The others, torn between duty and dread, hesitated, giving Margaret time to slip past them, her footsteps silent as she vanished into the convent's darkened halls. The search resumed, frantic now as the nuns combed every room, their lanterns revealing more traces of Margaret's presence. A singed curtain in the library, a pile of ashes in the chapel, a faint burn mark on the dormitory floor. Clara, her mind racing, realized that Margaret's actions were no longer random, but part of a deliberate pattern, a ritual building toward something catastrophic. She sent Father Daniel to check the convent's perimeter, fearing Margaret might have fled into the night. But he returned with grim news: the gate was locked, meaning Margaret was still inside somewhere waiting. The realization hit Clara like a blow. The convent was no longer a sanctuary, but a stage for whatever Margaret's voices had planned. As dawn approached, the nuns gathered in the chapel, their prayers desperate, their eyes darting to every shadow. Clara, clutching the ledger that mentioned Sister Abigail's fire a century before, felt a growing certainty that history was repeating itself, that Margaret was not just a troubled soul but a vessel for something older, something tied to the convent's past. The air grew heavy, the scent of smoke lingering despite the open windows, and Clara knew that the next night, October 17th, would bring the culmination of Margaret's mission. The truth, now almost within reach, seemed to flicker like the candles in the crypt, threatening to consume everything in its path. On the evening of October 17, 1993, St. Agnes Convent stood shrouded in a heavy mist, the air thick with an ominous stillness that seemed to press against its ancient walls. The nuns, their nerves frayed from the previous night's chaos in the crypt, moved through their duties with a haunted vigilance, their eyes scanning every shadow for Sister Margaret. Mother Superior Clara, her face etched with exhaustion, had spent the day in prayer, wrestling with the weight of her failure to protect the convent from the growing darkness. The scent of smoke, faint but persistent, lingered in the corridors, as if the building itself was exhaling the residue of Margaret's obsession. With Dr. Evelyn Harper's return delayed by the diocese's indecision, Clara felt the burden of the impending night fall squarely on her shoulders, a night she sensed would reveal the full scope of Margaret's mission. Margaret, still unaccounted for since her disappearance from the crypt, seemed to haunt the convent like a specter. The nuns' search had yielded nothing but more signs of her presence. A singed prayer book in the library, a trail of ashes leading to the cloister garden, a faint burn mark on the chapel door. Clara, clutching the old ledger that spoke of Sister Abigail's fire a century earlier, began to see Margaret's actions as more than madness, an echo of a past the convent had buried, a cycle of destruction that had found a new vessel in Margaret's fervent belief. She gathered the nuns in the chapel, urging them to stay together, to pray for strength, but their voices trembled, their faith shaken by the fear that Margaret's voices were not hers alone. As dusk fell, the convent's lights flickered, casting unsteady shadows across the stone floors. Sister Teresa, stationed at the chapel's entrance, noticed a faint glow from the direction of the dormitory, a warm, unnatural light that seemed to pulse against the gathering darkness. She alerted Clara, who led a small group, Sister Beatrice and Father Daniel, to investigate. They moved cautiously, their lanterns barely cutting through the thickening mist that seemed to seep into the convent itself. In the dormitory, they found the source, a small fire burning in the center of the hall, a pile of papers and fabric arranged in a spiral, its flames licking at the air with a quiet, deliberate hunger. Clara's heart sank as she recognized pages from Margaret's notebook among the ashes, their cryptic Latin phrases curling into smoke. The fire was quickly extinguished, but the discovery sent a wave of panic through the group. Father Daniel, his voice shaking, suggested sealing the convent's exits to trap Margaret inside. But Clara hesitated, fearing it would trap them all with whatever force was guiding her. Instead, she ordered a final search, splitting the nuns into pairs to cover every corner of the convent. As they moved through the darkened halls, the air grew heavier, the scent of smoke growing stronger, accompanied by a low, rhythmic chanting that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. Sister Agnes, paired with Sister Teresa, clutched her rosary, whispering prayers for protection, but her words faltered as they neared the chapel, where the chanting grew louder, its cadence eerily familiar. Inside the chapel, they found Margaret standing before the altar, her habit disheveled, her hands clutching a lit candle that cast a flickering glow across her face. The altar cloth was gone, replaced by a circle of ashes and wilted roses, arranged with a precision that felt ritualistic. The nuns froze, their lanterns trembling in their hands as Margaret turned to face them, her eyes burning with a strange, serene intensity. "It's time," she said, her voice calm but resonant, as if speaking for someone or something else. "The fire will cleanse us all," he promised. Clara, stepping forward, pleaded with her to stop, but Margaret's gaze was unwavering, her smile almost pitying, as if she saw a truth the others could not. Before anyone could act, a spark leapt from Margaret's candle, catching the edge of a nearby pew. The flame spread with unnatural speed, fed by a draft no one could trace, licking at the wooden benches and climbing toward the chapel's ancient beams. The nuns screamed, scrambling to douse the fire, but Margaret stood motionless, her arms outstretched, her lips moving in a silent chant. Father Daniel grabbed a heavy cloth, beating back the flames, while Clara seized Margaret's arm, dragging her from the altar. Margaret didn't resist, but her eyes never left the fire, her expression one of reverence, as if witnessing a divine act unfold. The fire, though contained, left the chapel scorched, its sacred air tainted by smoke and fear. Margaret, now restrained in her room under Father Daniel's watch, remained silent, her calm unbroken even as the nuns wept and prayed. Clara, standing amid the charred remains of the chapel, felt the weight of the night's events settle into her bones. The fire had been stopped, but the truth behind Margaret's voices remained elusive, a shadow that lingered in the convent's walls, whispering of a purpose yet unfulfilled. As the mist thickened outside, Clara knew the final reckoning was still to come, its shape hidden in the ashes of that fateful night. The dawn of October 18, 1993, broke over St. Agnes Convent with a pale, reluctant light, as if the sun itself hesitated to touch the scorched remains of the chapel. The fire, though extinguished, had left its mark, not just in the blackened pews and the acrid scent of smoke that clung to the air, but in the hearts of the nuns who had witnessed Sister Margaret's descent into a fervor that nearly consumed them all. Mother Superior Clara stood in the cloister garden, her hands trembling as she clutched the old ledger that linked Margaret's actions to a forgotten tragedy a century before. The convent, once a beacon of faith, now felt like a hollow shell, its sanctity fractured by a mystery that refused to fully reveal itself. Margaret, now under sedation in a locked room, awaited transfer to a psychiatric facility, But the questions she left behind burned brighter than the flame she'd ignited. Were her voices born of madness, divine will, or something older, something tied to the very stones of St. Agnes? In the days that followed, Dr. Evelyn Harper arrived, her clinical gaze cutting through the convent's lingering haze of fear. Her evaluation of Margaret was grim. She diagnosed her with a severe form of schizophrenia, marked by religious delusions and a dangerous fixation on fire as a symbol of purification. Yet even Harper admitted that Margaret's coherence, her unwavering belief in her messenger, defied easy categorization. The notebook, its pages filled with Latin phrases and sketches of flames, was sent to a theological scholar, who confirmed its references to medieval apocalyptic texts, but found no evidence of demonic influence, only a mind consumed by its own narrative. Margaret was transferred to a hospital in Albany, where she remained silent, her eyes fixed on some unseen horizon, her rosary still clutched in her hands as if it tethered her to the voices that had led her to the edge. The nuns, left to rebuild, struggled to make sense of the ordeal. Sister Teresa, haunted by the memory of Margaret's glowing eyes in the crypt, began to question her own faith, wondering if the convent's isolation had invited something darker than delusion. Sister Agnes, once timid, found a quiet strength, leading prayers to restore the community's spirit, though her voice trembled when she spoke of Margaret. Sister Beatrice, practical to the end, scrubbed the chapel clean but admitted in whispers that she sometimes felt watched, as if Margaret's presence lingered in the shadows. Clara, bearing the weight of her decisions, pored over the convent's history, uncovering more accounts of nuns who'd claimed to hear voices, each tied to moments of crisis in St. Agnes's past. The ledger's tale of Sister Abigail, who'd nearly burned the convent in 1872, mirrored Margaret's story too closely, suggesting a pattern that chilled Clara to her core. Was St. Agnes cursed, its walls a magnet for troubled souls? Or was it simply a place where faith and madness collided in catastrophic ways? The diocese, finally responding, sent a new priest to replace Father Daniel, who left for a quieter parish, unable to shake the memory of Margaret's serene conviction. The convent was repaired, its chapel reconsecrated, but the nuns never spoke of Margaret openly, their silence a shield against the questions that lingered. Did her voices come from within, a product of a fractured mind shaped by a tragic childhood? Or had something older, something tied to the convent's buried past, found a voice through her? The truth, like the ashes scattered across the chapel floor, remained elusive, a puzzle with pieces that refused to fit. What lingered was the unsettling realization that the human mind, so fragile and complex, could conjure visions so powerful they threatened to reshape reality itself. To you, the brave souls who've journeyed through this haunting tale, we offer our deepest gratitude. You've dared to peer into the shadows of St. Agnes, to walk alongside Clara and the nuns as they faced a mystery that tested their faith and their courage. You are part of a rare community, one that seeks to understand the inexplicable, to uncover the truths that hide in the cracks of the human psyche. In the comments below, share your thoughts with the phrase, "This story made me question the line between faith and madness." By doing so, you join the ranks of those who refuse to shy away from the dark corners of the mind, helping to build a space where we can explore the unsettling together. Please share this video with others, so they too can confront the chilling enigma of Sister Margaret and the burning convent. Your voice can light a spark, bringing more seekers to this journey, ensuring that stories like these, stories no one dares to tell, find the audience they deserve. Subscribe to our channel because the shadows are deep, and the truths they hide are waiting to be uncovered. Like a candle in a darkened room, your subscription keeps our curiosity alive, illuminating the mysteries that others fear to face. Keep watching, keep questioning, and join us as we delve into the next disturbing tale, where the boundaries of the human mind are tested once more.